Hey everyone, welcome back to the realm. I'll be your guide beyond Waking Realm. Today, we're diving into the meaning behind Cliff Unger, the father behind the battlefield. Before we begin, I do want to mention that while this narrative dive explores Death Stranding's Cliff Unger, the footage you're seeing comes from Death Stranding 2. Rather than revisiting the original game, I want to continue using this world as a backdrop for a character whose story still echoes throughout it. At first glance, Cliff Unger appears to be exactly what Death Stranding wants us to fear. A relentless soldier emerging from forgotten battlefields, commanding skeletal armies, and standing between Sam and the truth. Every encounter paints him as an unstoppable force, someone we are meant to survive rather than understand. But Death Stranding has never been a story about appearances. Beneath the uniform, the gunfire, and the smoke is a man whose greatest battle was never fought on a battlefield at all. It was fought for the chance to hold his child one more time. Cliff Unger's story isn't ultimately about war, it's about fatherhood, sacrifice, grief, and the enduring bond between a parent and their child. Today, I want to explore the humanity behind one of Hideo Kojima's most unforgettable characters, and why, by the end of his journey, Cliff is remembered not for the wars he fought, but for the love that continued to find him long after they ended. More than a soldier. Before Cliff Unger ever became one of Death Stranding's most intimidating figures, he was something much simpler: a husband, a soldier, and above all, a father. It's easy to remember Cliff for the battlefield. Every encounter surrounds him with gunfire, explosions, and an army that seems impossible to overcome. Those moments are unforgettable, but they can also be misleading. They encourage us to see Cliff as a warrior first, when in reality, the battlefield is only the stage on which his deepest struggle unfolds. Long before Sam ever faced him, Cliff's world had already begun to fall apart. After a tragic accident left his wife, Lisa, brain dead and sustained as a still mother, Cliff was left with only one source of hope: his unborn son, in a world already beginning to unravel. That child became the future he refused to surrender. This is what makes Cliff so compelling. His identity isn't built around violence. Violence simply becomes the language he's forced to speak in order to protect the person he loves most. That distinction matters because Death Stranding constantly asks us to look beyond what is immediately in front of us. Time and again, the game reminds us that people are rarely defined by the role they appear to play. At first, Cliff looks like another obstacle standing in Sam's path. But beneath every firefight is someone desperately trying to preserve the last connection that still gives his life meaning. From the very beginning, Cliff's purpose was never conquest. It was connection. A father's greatest loss. Every tragedy has a moment where everything changes. For Cliff Unger, that moment wasn't on the battlefield. It happened in a hospital room. As his wife, Lisa, was declared brain dead and sustained on life support as a still mother, Cliff devoted himself to the one life that still gave him hope, his unborn son. In a world growing increasingly uncertain, Sam wasn't simply his child. He represented a future Cliff still believed was worth protecting. That hope, however, was placed in the hands of people who saw Sam very differently. To Bridget Strand and those overseeing the BB program, Sam represented something far greater than one family. He was viewed as a key to research that could reshape humanity's understanding of life, death, and the beach. What Cliff saw as a son, others began to see as an experiment. That difference in perspective lies at the heart of Cliff's tragedy. This was never a conflict over science alone. It was a conflict over who had the right to define Sam's future. To Bridget, Sam represented possibility for humanity. To Cliff, he was simply his son. Neither side believed they were acting without purpose, but only one of them was forced to watch that purpose tear a family apart. When Cliff realized that future was no longer his to protect, everything else became secondary. In one devastating sequence, Cliff attempts to escape with Sam, refusing to leave his child behind. But before he can reclaim the future he envisioned, both father and son are shot. It's one of Death Stranding's most heartbreaking moments, because it ends before either of them truly has a chance to begin. Cliff loses not only his life, but the opportunity to watch his son grow, to teach him, to protect him, or even to say goodbye. From that moment forward, every battlefield we enter, every confrontation we survive, and every desperate pursuit we witness stems from that single loss. Cliff isn't chasing war. He's chasing the life that was stolen from him. The man we misunderstood. One of Death Stranding's greatest strengths is its willingness to challenge first impressions. Few characters embody that better than Cliff Unger. Every encounter with Cliff is designed to make us fear him. He appears without warning, pulling Sam into fractured battlefields where survival becomes the only priority. Surrounded by gunfire, soldiers, and the chaos of war, it's easy to believe Cliff is simply another force standing between Sam and his mission. But Death Stranding quietly plants clues that something isn't quite right. Cliff rarely behaves like someone driven by conquest. Even in the middle of combat, his attention isn't truly fixed on Sam. Again and again, he searches for his BB. His dialogue, his determination, and even his frustration all point towards the same goal. He isn't fighting because he enjoys war. He's searching for the child he believes was taken from him. That's what makes these encounters so tragic in hindsight. As players, we interpret Cliff through Sam's perspective. We see a dangerous enemy who repeatedly appears to stop our progress. But Cliff experiences those same moments very differently. To him, every encounter is another desperate to attempt to reunite with his son. The tragedy isn't that Cliff keeps finding Sam, is that he doesn't yet understand who Sam has become. Kojima builds this misunderstanding with remarkable restraint. Rather than revealing the truth immediately, he allows both the player and Cliff to live inside the same uncertainty. We fear him because Sam fears him. Cliff pursues because he believes his son is still within reach. That's what makes the eventual revelation feel so earned. The story doesn't rewrite Cliff, it rewrites our understanding of him. There's an important difference. Understanding doesn't erase the fear we experience during those encounters, nor does it undo the violence that took place. Instead, it completely changes the lens through which we remember them. What once looked like relentless pursuit becomes the desperate search of someone who never stopped believing his child was still waiting for him. Only then do we realize that neither of them truly understood the other. The final connection. Every encounter with Cliff Unger leads to a single moment of truth. Every battlefield, every desperate pursuit, and every confrontation is driven by the same unwavering hope that he might find his son again. What makes the final revelation so powerful isn't simply that Sam is Cliff's son. It's that the answer has been standing in front of both of them the entire time. By the time Cliff finally understands the truth, Sam is no longer the infant he desperately tried to save. He's a grown man who has lived an entire life without ever knowing the father who sacrificed everything for him. In another story, this might have been the moments for revenge. Cliff has every reason to hate the people who stole his family, every reason to hold on to his anger, and every reason to refuse peace. But Cliff doesn't choose revenge. He chooses recognition. When he finally sees Sam not as the child he lost, but as the man his son became, something remarkable happens. The war ends. Not because anyone wins the battle, but because Cliff no longer has anything left to prove. His purpose was never to reclaim the past. It was to know that his son had lived. For me, that's what makes Cliff one of Hideo Kojima's most heartbreaking characters. Beneath every gunshot and every battlefield was someone carrying decades of grief. Never realizing that the child he was searching for had already grown into the man standing before him. And perhaps that's why his final goodbye carries so much emotional weight. It's not the ending of a soldier, it's the farewell of someone whose search finally comes to an end. For the first time in decades, Cliff finds peace. Legacy beyond the battlefield. Cliff Unger's story reminds us that some of the strongest people are not defined by the battles they fight, but by the people they refuse to stop loving. It's easy to remember Cliff for his military uniform, his commanding presence, or the haunting battlefields where we face him. Those moments are unforgettable, but they aren't what define him. What defines Cliff is the quiet truth that existed beneath every confrontation, every step he took, every battle he fought, every impossible obstacle he refused to surrender to was for one reason: his son. Throughout Death Stranding, we spend our entire time reconnecting cities, rebuilding fractured relationships, and reminding people that no one truly survives alone. Cliff's story reflects that same idea on the most personal level imaginable. His connection wasn't to a nation or a mission, it was to his son. That's why Cliff's story continues to resonate. Not because he wins, not because he survives, not because he becomes a legend. He stays with us because his journey speaks to something almost everyone can understand: the fear of losing someone we love. And the hope that somehow we might reach them again. By the end of his journey, Cliff isn't remembered for the wars he fought. He's remembered for the love he refused to let go of. Perhaps that's why his story continues to resonate years after Death Stranding's release. Beneath the mystery, the beaches, and the supernatural lies something deeply human: the love of parents, willing to sacrifice everything for their child. In the end, Cliff Unger wasn't fighting to become a legend. He was simply trying to make it home to his son. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, and if you've been enjoying these narrative dives, I set up a small Ko-fi page connected to Beyond Waking Realm. There's absolutely no pressure. It's simply there for anyone who'd like to help support what I'm continuing to build here. I also love to hear your thoughts. What part of Cliff Unger's journey resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until our next story, more stories await.